This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. Saddle, Sand, Sea is a multi-year, multi-event challenge dreamed up by Seamus Crawford and Paddy Montgomery. They completed the first challenge, the Race Across Europe, in 2015, cycling 2,933 miles in 12 days, crossing the Pyrenees once and the Alps twice. Next, in 2016, they completed the Marathon des Sables, billed as the toughest foot race on Earth. It's 6 marathons in 6 days across the Sahara Desert. Finally, in 2017, they will complete the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, a 3,000 nautical mile row across the Atlantic Ocean. They are doing this to raise funds for the Prostate Project and Shooting Star Chase. And you can learn more about their adventures at saddlesandsea.com. Seamus and Paddy, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks.
Guys, why did you want to take on a giant challenge like this?
Paddy and I were at university together, and we'd both watched on TV at the time, which was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, even longer, when people had first started rowing across the Atlantic, and it was in the press, and it was super exciting. And we'd seen people, the likes of James Cracknell and Ben Fogle, they helped raise the profile of the race. We'd both kind of chatted about it, maybe over too many beers at university, that it was something that we'd quite like to do, but neither of us had the time or the money or were able to kind of commit to the process of it at the time. So it was probably nearly 2 years ago, maybe now, that Paddy kind of first approached me again while we're both working in London. He said, look, this is something I'd really like to do. Are you still keen to do it? And I jumped at the chance, said absolutely. And we both kind of played a lot of sport in our youth, and kind of over the last 2-3 years of working in London, we maybe hadn't focused as much on kind of doing any exercise or kind of doing charity events or anything like that. So it was something we kind of really wanted to take on and do something, something outside of work, outside of the daily routine. So we decided we wanted to maybe think of the idea of creating a 3-part challenge, which is when, I don't know, Paddy might want to follow on with this, but we kind of came up with the idea of Saddle, Sand, Sea.
When we sort of started to think about the row, the problem is when we had all these years to go, once you've set your benchmark of rowing the Atlantic, you basically have to do everything at that level. So the MDS was in the same ballpark. And we had a couple of ideas of potentially swimming the Channel, or we'd always heard about the Race Across America, which is the big cycling race over there. But there were a few logistical issues about that. Just one, getting to America, and 2, you have to do quite a few training events or qualification events. And in the time we had, we just wouldn't be able to do those. So we did a bit more research and came across Race Across Europe, which is an equivalent distance and equivalent difficulty, if not harder, because I think you go through a few more mountains. And just quickly, the idea of making it a triathlon of things, so a cycle, run, and then row, just all really came together, and it fitted perfectly of doing one each year, 2015, 2016, 2017.
These challenges are pretty crazy, and neither of us had taken on anything like this before. As I say, we both had played quite a lot of sport in our youth, but hadn't really done a great deal over the last 4 or 5 years. But we decided to do some challenges for charity, and we really wanted to make sure that if we were going to do it, we really wanted to do something really extraordinary. And that was obviously starting off with a row, and it's kind of morphed into this 3-part challenge. And it's kind of, for both of us, it's become a massive part of our lives, having, as I say, not having kind of done anything like this before, but also kind of incorporating it into daily life and training, etc. It's a huge challenge, but hopefully it'll be something that will really kind of help us raise a lot of money for the charities we've chosen.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to ask about was, do you two guys have regular day jobs that you have to deal with?
Yeah, very much so. Both work in semi-city jobs, so we're pretty full on most of the time.
Are you able to find the time to train as much as you need to? That's part one of the question. The second part of the question is, are you then financing all of this yourselves?
We both have, unfortunately, quite busy jobs. So we both kind of work, as you said, in finance, and that usually sort of means relatively early starts and fairly late finishes a lot of the time. But one of the things we've both kind of come to the terms with is that having committed to this, it was something that we realised was never going to be easy. And we had to kind of plan fairly carefully how we went about our training regime. We got some help through a fantastic sort of personal trainer through a friend of Paddy's called Rich Hume, who's helped us with a fantastic training program, has helped us kind of structure it around our daily commitments. And on the financing side, I think Paddy can talk about that more.
So put it bluntly, so far it's been all ourselves. And a couple of people who've been sort of very kind and given a small amount of money, or just things like kit or food and things like that. But the next one, which is the row, is the most expensive of the three, and that's the main challenge now. Really, is just getting to the start line of that one, which I think is something that we've come to realise for all of these challenges. If you read about people doing amazing stuff, half the battle is actually just getting to the start lines. It's something that we're trying pretty hard now to reach out to potential sponsors or people who'd be keen to get behind us and help get to the start line of the row. And we've put together a committee of friends to try and help with that. And we've got a few things up our sleeves, such as promotional videos and events we're going to host. We're quietly confident we'll get there, but it's going to be hard work for the next sort of 8 months or so.
Guys, let's talk in some detail now about some of these events. Let's start with the race across Europe. First of all, give me an idea what kind of bikes you're riding.
So we were riding a Trek Domani 4 Series. One of the things we did, given we're not cyclists and we hadn't really done any cycling before, we decided to go to a shop called Bespoke, and it's an amazing place. And we basically went there and said, "We're doing this. Please, could you help us?" And they fitted us up perfectly, and they put all your numbers into a spreadsheet, and this bike came out as pretty much the perfect one for us, and it worked amazingly, actually.
Just to kind of echo Paddy's point, I mean, Paddy certainly turned out to be a better cyclist than I was, but neither of us really had done any cycling before this. So signing up before it was probably a little bit of naivety and going into the challenge and kind of what it really involved. And certainly during the bike sort of choosing process and buying all the kit, etc., it was great to be able to chat to some amazing experts and on kind of how to go about things and what to watch out for. But we certainly had to hit the ground running as far as training was concerned. Make sure that when we got to the start line, we had a bit of a plan to take on the enormous challenge.
So how does it work, guys? Give me an idea of some of the basic rules. And I'm guessing this is some sort of a relay where you're not riding at the same time.
Yeah, so the event's set up so you either be solo, 2s, 4s, or more. So we were the first pair ever to do it. The general gist is it's a relay, so we did 4-hour stints each, and you can change that however you wish, but we decided that 4 hours was long enough to get a far enough distance, but short enough to not sort of go completely mad, and at least get sort of enough sleep. So that's what we did for 11 and a half days of 4 hours on, 4 hours off.
And there must be some sort of a support vehicle.
Thank goodness there was. So we managed to find 6 fantastic people. The vast majority of whom came through a website, which was sort of a volunteering website for adventuring website. They came from all over the place. So we had all different types of nationalities, ages, sexes, backgrounds, and I think only 2 of whom we'd actually met before we got to Calais, which was the beginning of the race. That kind of gives you an idea of maybe how difficult it was to try and prepare for the race, organise everything beforehand, and ensure that you were kind of ready for the start line around our kind of normal daily lives. But thank goodness it was, I guess you could almost put it was a pretty amazing human experiment, putting 6 people who'd never met from completely different backgrounds, as well as us two, in a very compact, tight, highly pressurised, tiring environment. It ended up working brilliantly. Probably a lot of it through luck and challenges that we faced, not actually hindering our time and progress, but everyone seemed to pull together and work amazingly well together. And certainly, I think I speak for Paddy as well, that neither of us would have got anywhere near the finish line without those 6 people to support us through. Paddy can maybe talk about how the support vehicles actually worked, as far as having a big Winnebago following us and a saloon car following us, all our kit. But as far as the kind of daily routine was concerned, they would help us with preparing some of our food when we finished. So we would have our 4-hour cycle session. We'd come off. They would have some food ready for us. They would help us. We had a kind of a part-time masseuse on board to try and help us with our legs if we were particularly sore. And Paddy, at one instance, actually had a pretty bad injury and managed to get some strapping from the guys to help him to carry on for the last couple of days. And they were incredible at route, mapping out the route for us and telling us where to go. So that we had earpieces which would go through to microphones in the Winnebago, would be telling us where to go. Obviously, because we're going through parts of the countries across Europe in the middle of nowhere. So without them, we just wouldn't have got through it. And also moral support. They were absolutely incredible when we were really feeling low. They would help us and push us through, despite the fact that they were probably just as tired as we were.
So let me ask, you mentioned you found these people through a website. What is the website?
It's explorersconnect.com.
Tell me what was one of your most memorable moments from the race across Europe.
I think one is probably, Austria and Germany in general. That was about day 2 or 3, and we were just starting to figure out how to do things, I think. And also just the scenery and roads are unbelievable. You're going through these beautiful small villages up the Alps, and the weather sort of was actually quite nice to us. So that was a really nice time. And then the second one was probably the going up Col d'Angelo, which is, I think, the 3rd highest paved road in Europe, and it's the big pass between Italy and France. And I think for both of us, that was one of the tougher moments. And I sort of look back on it fondly, well, weirdly fondly, just because we got through it, and it was truly horrific. And I think that was a big testament just to our ability to just plough on through, but also, given you were going up these tiny roads, the support team had to get the massive Winnebago up there as well. It was a sort of combination of us doing what we needed to do, the support team doing what they needed to do, and getting to the top was quite a nice sort of relief, despite it being in the middle of the night.
Just to echo Paddy, going up the Col d'Angelo was amazing, but it was quite surreal, having done only a very limited amount of cycling at night before we left, and obviously having to do this 24 hours a day for the best part of 12 days. We actually reached the top of this peak in the middle of the night, and we were kind of actually at the top of the peak with the kind of the sign in the border between France and Italy. We were kind of looking well above the clouds. It was pretty surreal. It was an amazing experience. And coming down the other side was particularly cold, as you can imagine, at the elevation we were at. But I think probably the most memorable and challenging part I think about when I think back on it is just the relentless nature of the challenge of having to, wake up after only 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours sleep, of kind of fairly interrupted sleep, because you're sailing the back of the Winnebago that's driving ahead to the next stage, at which you're going to meet the cyclist once that he's finished his stage. Having to, all hours of the day, whether it be 1 o'clock in the morning, having to constantly eat and constantly drink as much as you possibly could. So, for example, one of us would finish our shift at 1 o'clock in the morning. It would be pitch dark. We'd have to come in, eat maybe 4 or 5 Weetabix and a huge bowl of pasta, then try and sleep for 2 hours. Then as you're just kind of drifting off to sleep, we try and explain this to our friends. Just imagine drifting off to sleep and you've just managed to fall away, and then about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody wakes you up, says you've got to eat another 10 Weetabix, a huge bowl of pasta, and then go and sit on a bike for 4 hours. And you could be waking up on the side of a mountain and have to start your shift going up, 13-14% gradient. So that side of it was hugely psychologically challenging, although it was physically very, very, very difficult. I think both of us found the psychological element of it really tough as well.
Do you guys have any desire to go do this race again?
There's probably a short and a long answer. I think the short answer is probably no. I think maybe in the years to come, I would potentially go on a cycling holiday where it wouldn't be cycling all hours of the day, but I don't think I would ever put myself through those 12 days again.
I think to echo Paddy, it was an incredible route. I mean, as he said before, that some of the passes and some of the villages and the areas we went through were just so beautiful and amazing places. But I think to have done it on that kind of in that shorter time, it was physically and psychologically quite unpleasant. At times, it did feel a bit like torture because it was just so relentless. I think to be able to do that route again, if you'd had enough time and you had, maybe 5-6 weeks and you could stop off and enjoy the places you were cycling through, maybe. But as Paddy said, I don't think I'd want to go through those 12 days again, knowing what we went through. What massively helped both of us was probably we didn't really realise what we were getting ourselves into before we started. And thank goodness we didn't, because it really would have, I think on a daily basis, it would have really challenged us that much more because we didn't really know what was to come each day. So if we had, I think that would have hindered our kind of psychological strength maybe.
Hey, what place did you guys finish?
It's still an event that's sort of starting to establish itself. So we're the first pair ever to do it, and there was no other pairs doing it. So theoretically, we came first. But so yeah, we were the first pair ever to do it, which is still kind of a big thing.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
Hey, if somebody was asking you for advice on doing the race across Europe, what would you tell them?
I think we lucked out a lot with our support crew, but I think that's probably a place you basically win and lose it with them, because I think physically you'd get yourself ready, but it's without those guys, you're not going to be able to get through it all. So maybe just get to know your support crew a bit better and just have a really clear outline of everyone's job. And I think everyone in our sport group, after a couple of days, it just figured out what they needed to do at each changeover and things like that. And it really depends if you're going for outright speed or just to make sure you stay friends at the end of it. Because I think if we wanted to go, I don't know, half a day quicker, we could have made the changeovers a lot quicker and a lot snappier. But I think we would have all massively fallen out doing it.
As Paddy said, I think the support crew is massive. But I think one thing that we did try and ensure was that it wasn't a too stressful environment. We try, and it obviously was naturally a stressful environment because everyone's tired and there's a kind of a routine that you need to follow. But we tried to keep everyone in high spirits. I think that was a massive point of it. If we'd gone too much at the beginning of it, where we'd said, right, everyone down to the minute has to be organised to the nth degree, I think that would have created too much stress, and I think it kind of almost would have imploded. I think that would be great if you were doing it over the course of maybe 2, 3, 4 days, but over the course of nearly 2 weeks, that just becomes such a difficult thing and stressful thing to maintain. Amazingly, there really weren't any fallings out between any of the support crew, between Paddy or I, between Paddy and I and the support crew. It was just, everyone was just amazing for 2 weeks. So it was, from that sense, I think we kind of probably, as Paddy said, lucked out a bit on the process we followed. But I think maybe from a physical standpoint and a training standpoint, I think it's one of those things where you can never really train, as with all of these events we're doing, you can never really train to make sure that you can cycle 12 and a half days, more or less, for kind of 12 hours a day without kind of doing it. So I personally found that very difficult to sit on a bike for 12 hours a day. My back was incredibly sore. My behind was very, very sore. I think that would be the main piece of advice.
Hey, let's move on and talk about the Marathon des Sables. Give me a little idea of what that race was like.
It was weird, actually, when we, having signed up for the 3 events, the order in which you sort of the excitedness about for each one sort of changes quite a lot. But I think we were both quite excited about the MDS because you just heard so many stories about it. It's been going for so long. It definitely lives up to its title of toughest foot race on earth, because I think the one word I'd use is brutal. It's everything's just sort of out there to really push you. It's the temperature, so it could, I think when we were out there, it averaged around 45 degree to up to 50. And being 2 guys from England was probably not really used to that sort of temperature from day to day. You've got the limited water, you've got the unbelievable terrain, which is beautiful to look at, but when you're faced with 12 kilometres of dunes, it's quite daunting, and just the sheer amount of sand you've got to trudge through. And then also the fact you're carrying all your kit, just the cherry on top of many things that is working against you. But on the other side, it's an amazing event, and one I didn't enjoy in places, but actually looking back, it's sort of quite fond memories.
I'd absolutely agree. I think it's one of the main things that I think neither of us, probably very naively again, didn't really appreciate how much, and it sounds silly to say because it's called the Marathon des Sables, but we didn't really appreciate how much sand there would be. We kind of thought there would be a lot of rocky riverbeds and kind of elements of sand, but I think the thing we both found the toughest was just the endless sand dunes, which were one guy we actually met out there described it perfectly. He said, imagine if you go to the beach with your family and you're carrying a hamper and you walk first onto the beach and the sand is so fine and so deep and so difficult to walk on that after 10 yards you decide to just drop your hamper there. That was kind of what it was like to run on, but for kind of long piece of 10, 15, 20 kilometers at a time. So that was something that I think we both took us a little bit by surprise. But I guess once you're out there, you can't really do anything about it. You just got to get on with it.
Are you guys running this race together side by side?
We've done some training before, longer runs here. We've done a marathon run down on the south coast of England, and we found it very difficult to run together. But I think after the first day, where we both encountered some pretty big difficulties when it came to hydration, we were both a little bit delirious and actually really struggled to get to the finish line on the first day. I think we decided from then on that from day two, which we stayed together all the first day, but from day two, I think we thought we needed to stick together to make sure we both got to the end of this, because it is a psychologically challenging race, because it is a really barren environment. And so to have a good mate next to you kind of pushing you through and keeping you going was a massive part of making sure I think we both finished.
So what's it like when you get to the end of a day? Just give me a little idea how that whole situation works out.
You cross the finish line and it's a combination of just relief, but I think your brain is switched on for the entirety of before you get to the finish line. So you're like, I've just got to get there. And then the second you cross your line, your brain relaxes a little bit. And then just your body takes over and every part of your body starts screaming in pain. And it's just a case of preparing yourself for the next day, really. So you're given your rations of water for that evening. You've got to trudge back to the tent, and it's catching up with the other guys and girls in your tent, but it's making sure you drink the right amount of water, eat the food, sort of try and take your trainers off slowly but surely to make sure your blisters aren't in too much pain. And I think actually we were quite lucky with the 5 other people who were in our tent, because we got there quite late and it was just a lucky dip. We had 5 other awesome people in there, and I think that's one of the most enjoyable bits is you all got back at the end of the day and you're all eating food, and it's just recounting stories of each other's horrors and how painful it was. But it's a good thing that brings people together, and having a laugh makes things seem a lot easier.
Having kind of gone through the day, and you've carried everything. You've carried your food, you've carried your sleeping bag, you've carried your water, you've carried your sleeping mat. Basically, your life possessions are just on your back, which we're kind of not really used to. It was quite nice coming back to a tent surroundings. As Paddy was saying, you've got lots of other people, and for example, if your food for the day that you'd packed in your bag was porridge in the morning, and you really didn't feel like porridge, there was always a chance of trading with somebody else in your tent for some noodles or whatever it was that you felt like. So that was great from that sense. But as far as the actual tents are concerned, I think everyone in the tent found that quite difficult. There was, to try and describe it, it's essentially just an enormous thick black rug which they prop up with poles. And as you can imagine, there are quite a few tents to prop up each day, so they're not necessarily the most robust. And one thing we didn't really appreciate as far as the weather was concerned, we knew it was going to be hot, but we didn't really appreciate the actual wind and the sandstorms and the ferocity of them and the frequency of them. We didn't really appreciate. So, for example, on our first night, we came back to across the finish line, packed up our stuff, and everyone was asleep because they were so tired. As soon as the sun went down, about 8 o'clock, and then by 11 o'clock, the tent had fallen down on top of us because there was a sandstorm that had come charging through the camp and had blown everything down. Everything's covered in sand. Your bag's filled with sand. Sleeping bags filled with sand. From that perspective, it wasn't your, a usual. Well, the amount of elite athletes were there. It wasn't their usual kind of post-run relaxation session. It was certainly almost a bit of endurance off the course as well as on the course.
I'm trying not to laugh that your tent fell down on you.
Yeah, that happened on more than one occasion. As you were walking past the tents, you could always tell the groups of people in the tents who had come from the armed forces, because they looked like by far the most robust tents, and they never seemed to blow down. Whereas ours, from their training, they've obviously got some great skills, survival skills to be able to sort their tents out. But none of us had any of that. So there was just usually a fair bit of moaning. And actually, there was one woman in our tent who was basically led the charge in the tent. She was easily had far more courage than any of us put together, but she always seemed to be the one that was ordering us about, making sure that we were in ship shape and getting the tent back in order, which was great.
So just so I understand, these armed forces people that you mentioned, they're modifying their tents, or because what I'm trying to understand is who's responsible for putting up the tents and why aren't they all the same?
So the organizer is probably the one luxury they do give you. So you carry everything in your bag, your food, your spare kit, your water, your sleeping bag, all that sort of stuff. And the one thing they give you is this black carpet tent. But just due to the number of people out there, I think there are 1,200 who started it this year. So you've got tents to fit all those people. So these guys are putting them up in no time at all. So there's probably not the most amount of care put into each one. And in our naivety, we would just assume ours would stay together, where the armed forces would sort of have a quick look, know where to put down a nail or two and add an extra bit of wood to hold up a bit of carpet, whereas we just hoped and prayed it would be all right. So everyone gets the same tent, but they just used it better.
They were certainly better at modifying whatever the wooden poles were that were holding up. We never unfortunately found out their technique before the end of the race.
Guys, let me ask the same question I did for the race across Europe, which is what for the Marathon des Sables was your most memorable moment?
There were lots of ones that were personal ones, but I think the most memorable which really changed the idea of the race for me, that it wasn't necessarily a race, it was much more of an actual challenge. There was a guy from the British Armed Forces who had lost both of his legs below the knee a few years ago, and he had prosthetic legs and was decided to take part in the Marathon des Sables and was raising money for Walking with the Wounded, which is a charity for the British Armed Forces of people who are injured out in service. And we'd heard about this guy, and we actually watched him on a few occasions sort of jogging or kind of marching through the desert on the first few days, and we just couldn't believe it. And we had gone to see one of our tent mates cross the line after the fourth stage of the race, which is a 55-mile essentially double marathon stage, where you don't have any camps in the middle. You just have to do basically 55 miles in one go, and you start at, I think it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and there's a cut-off point the following day at 7 p.m. But everyone tries to get through it as quickly as possible. So we'd gone to meet one of our tent mates who we'd heard was coming to the finish line, which was about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock the following day. So on the second day, so they'd spent a good 36 hours or so, 30 hours out in the desert. And luckily we managed to watch this guy, Duncan, with his prosthetic legs come across the finish line. And it was the most incredible, inspiring thing I've ever seen, because everyone clapped him across the line, but then there was almost a kind of an eerie silence for maybe a minute or so as he kind of walked over to one of the seats past the finish line to sit down, and because no one could really believe he'd done it. Everyone had realised that we'd done 3 marathons through the desert for 3 consecutive days previously, and then had just run a double marathon 55-mile race through. And I say it's not just through the desert. This is up and down really tough, challenging sand dunes, mountains, rocky riverbeds. And it was just amazing to think how difficult we'd all found it. Yet this guy who was so hindered by his legs had managed to get across just through sheer guts, determination, and psychological strength. So I think for a lot of people, that was one of the most amazing experiences about it, because it made you realise that the challenge wasn't necessarily about finishing as quickly as you possibly could, or trying to come the highest place. It was, everyone has their own challenges in life, and whether they're kind of visible and you can see them, or whether they're they're in their own people's heads. It can be literally somebody just wanting to finish the race, just for as one of the guys in our tents had, just wanted to get to the end. Or it can be Duncan's case to try and finish and make sure you can prove to everyone you can still do it. So yeah, that was for me the biggest experience. But I don't know, Paddy might have a few other ones as well.
No, I think there are moments where you're in sort of a world of pain yourself, and you get to the top of a hill and you just look out across the Sahara Desert, and it's probably not anywhere we'll ever go back again, and you realise how lucky you are to be there, and you see some beautiful views, and as the sun sets and you just see the stars at night, I think that all adds to just how amazing this race is. But I would completely agree, watching Duncan come across the line is something I'll never forget. And as Seamus was saying, it just proved that if you put your mind to something, you can do anything, and you complain about things at times, and if people are in a much worse situation or more difficult situation can get through it, then you definitely can yourself, and it's much more mind over matter. And if you tell people you're going to do it and you truly believe you want to do it, then you will do. So, hands down, that was my number one.
For the Marathon des Sables, if someone was asking you for advice, what advice would you give them?
As Seamus was saying, the one thing we hadn't fully appreciated was how much sand there was. So I would potentially do some more training on sand, but it's always difficult to really replicate the situations you'll be in. The one thing I would definitely do if I was ever going to do it again, or advice I would give, is you can go to heat chambers and things like that, and they'll do a salt test on you. And what that tells you is basically how much you sweat in an hour and how much salt you lose. And that's really key for making sure you keep hydrated. Because as Seamus was saying, on day one, we weren't really on top of it as we could have been. And we probably didn't drink as much as we should have done in the first part of the day. So that really challenged us in the second part of the day. Well, almost to the point where we were looking at each other worrying whether we would actually get to the finish line of day one. Whereas if you have a bit of information about your sweat levels and how much salt you lose, you can hopefully try and counterbalance it a bit more.
For me, again, that is probably the biggest element of the whole challenge. It's not just about running as quickly as you possibly can. It's all about managing your body and managing. It's very, can be very different for each individual. Yeah, I don't. Again, like I said on the cycle, I don't think there's any real amount of training you can do to prepare for it. I mean, the girl in our tent was doing 100 miles a week for a long period before the race, and she was doing fantastically in the race. And I think she even found, although you're doing a lot lower distance than that a day, I think she found it incredibly tough. It was a lot tougher than everyone had envisaged. And I think it's not necessarily about another thing which I think would be really good is to try, which helped us a lot on the cycle, is trying to run when you're training. Maybe try and run dehydrated, or run when you're hungry. Don't necessarily feel like you're fully hydrated and fully fed before every single training sessions, because that's just never going to happen. So that was something that I think we both tried to do before our cycle, and I think which helped us in the run was getting used to not feeling in top shape before every session, to try and make sure that your body can and your mind can kind of get you through feeling not particularly great.
And one other, probably not as important, but it actually picks your mood up quite a lot, is in terms of food. There's a sort of a provider of food called Expedition Food, which do awesome sort of ration packs and tell you what sort of calories you need each day. But you'd get sort of porridge and oats in the morning. And we tested them out here, and they taste awesome, but it's a very different place, the desert. And after a few days, when you're absolutely knackered, you're actually craving salty food just because of the amount you sweat. So I'd probably take more sort of main meals, or sort of things like noodles and sort of cup of soups and things like that for breakfast instead of porridge, just to shake the palate up a little bit more and make it slightly easier to eat.
Let's move on to the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. Guys, why do you want to row an ocean?
I think it was just following on from what Seamus said earlier. We saw the documentary of James Cracknell and Ben Fogle, and had read up about a lot of other people doing it. And having done a lot of sport back in the day, but probably not for a while, we wanted to set ourselves a challenge of doing something big. There are challenges which you can do, such as doing marathons or Land's End to John O'Groats, which is quite a large bike race and popular here in the UK. But we decided we want to try and push ourselves a bit more and really test ourselves physically and mentally. And the row is one of the toughest things you can do. And we're just so overexcited about trying it out. So we thought, why not?
What's the name of the documentary?
I think it's called Through Hell and High Water.
Have you got the boat yet?
No, so that's we're looking at a couple of boats now. The boat is probably the biggest item in terms of expense for the row. So we're trying to work on getting sponsors on board to help fund that. So we're working on that quite hard at the moment. There are a couple of boats we're looking at, but we're mindful to wait to get sponsors on board before we sort of fully commit and get one. But we've got enough time between now and the row, so we're confident we'll get there.
Have you started training for this yet?
So I think we probably both, after we'd finished the Marathon des Sables, had decided to have a little bit of a break and kind of let our bodies recuperate a little bit. I haven't specifically started training yet. I've started getting back into the gym and make sure our kind of base level of fitness from the run is maintained. But specific training as yet, I think hasn't been prescribed by Rich. So I think we're actually, luckily, Rich, our trainer, has actually rode the Atlantic himself before. And I think physically it sounds like it's obviously incredibly tough. It is probably out of any challenge you can do. There's almost kind of no way of really being able to prepare to row 2 hours on, 2 hours off for the best part of 60 days. You can sit on the rowing machine and try and kind of row for long periods on the in your lunch break or before work or after work or the weekends out on the water. But I think it sounds like it's going to be a much bigger psychological challenge than necessarily physical. I think the physical side of it, you just have to get on with it. There's no real option.
Guys, tell me about the charities that you're supporting.
Yeah, so the one I've decided is the Prostate Project, and it's an awesome patient-run charity which is local to where I grew up, just outside a place called Farnham. It aims to raise awareness of prostate cancer, but it also does a lot of research into diagnosing it and trying to find tests which you can sort of diagnose it quicker, because the quicker you find it, it sort of significantly improves your ability to treat it. And it's an area which my father's a doctor, he's a urologist and does a lot of work with prostate cancer patients, and he's done a lot of work with them, the Prostate Project, in the past. So it just seemed like a really great fit. And actually, given it's a local, relatively small charity, a lot of the money that's given goes straight to the research, because I think about 96p in every pound goes direct to the research or the work they're doing. So I just thought it was a great charity to raise a load of money for.
Charity I chose was Shooting Star Chase, which is a charity who helps families and of children and babies who have life-limiting conditions. Came across that through a family friend of ours was getting treated in hospital and was coming out of hospital and met a family there whose child was being treated by Shooting Star Chase, and it was just, we got in touch with them and they were absolutely amazing. From the first email we sent them to the first discussion we've had, they've been incredibly supportive, and we've had a chance to go and visit one of their hospices. They have 2 or 3 hospices just outside London, which are for families to come and bring their kids and obviously kids' siblings as well, to stay and to support them through a really difficult time and through to maybe the vast majority of the time to the end of their life. So, for example, they have a swimming pool that is specifically designed for kids who have can't go to a local swimming pool, for example, with their family and enjoy themselves. It's special. It's got a special temperature. It's specially regulated. The light's specially regulated. They have all the equipment to be able to help kids who are in wheelchairs to be able to get into the pool safely and out safely. They're just amazing people and make a real difference to both the children but also the families, maybe after their kids have passed away, to help them with the bereavement process and help their siblings to kind of get over the process as well.
Between now and the start of the Talisker Whiskey Challenge, what do you guys have on the plate?
We have a lot of fundraising to do. So we obviously have our own kind of personal side of it to try and raise money to be able to get to the start of the row. But we also have a couple of big charity events being held probably at the end of this year, with more or less a year to go before the row, and then towards the back end of next year as well, prior to the row. We're going to have some big charity events in the form of dinners or a ball and raffles, etc., to be able to raise money for the 2 charities.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more and if they want to donate to your causes?
2 ways. You can either go to our website, which is saddlesandsea.com, and there's a load of information there on how you can support us, as well as what we've done in the past and videos and things like that. And then you can email us at saddlesandsea@gmail.com.
Seamus Crawford, Paddy Montgomery, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us the story of Saddle Sand Sea. More to come with the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. Good luck on that, and good luck on your fundraising.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for your time.
Recorded June 8th, 2016. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.